There we go. Now we're recording. Okay, so our research topic is what has caused the increasing polarization in American politics. So just a brief overview of polarization. If you think a lot like a magnet is a polar object that has two different distinct sides, the South Pole and the North Pole. So polarization in regards to politics means that the more moving away from the middle ground and moving out towards each of the poles.
Okay, so historically it can be observed that the polarization of politics is something that has been deeply integrated into our history, especially as the American nation. And this is mainly shown by one, it's just mainly a snowball effect that's happened because the party separation that happened during Adams and Jefferson's era, and just the evolution of parties has caused this polarization. And when you think about it, it's mainly the civilians that has also aided in this division. Because when you look back in history, how many of you guys are in APUS? So you guys most likely remember talking about how, or at least reading that Adams and Jefferson, it was the civilians that would argue over the presidency and not the candidates themselves. But it's evolved to this point where it's the civilians and the candidates of which that are arguing with each other. And the parties themselves are, they come from many backgrounds, and this is where our social inclusion comes in.
So bipartisan has impacted politics in many ways, and one of the ways I'm going to talk about is the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise had a tough choice because the convention's leaders were split between large and small states, and people have questions like, would one state get more representation because it's a bigger state, or would one state So Roger Sherman had an answer to this problem, and he had the idea that both types of representation should be in office or in Congress. And the main word that represents bipartisan is equality. And did you guys know that inequality is actually a bipartisan issue? So, and that leads me to my next topic, which is wealth inequality. It has changed politics because each party views the wealth inequality differently. Like, for instance, the Republicans want to lower taxes and strengthen our economy, while the Democrats want to raise taxes on the rich. This worsening imbalance is now fueling political extremism and accentuating gender and racial divides. It's also undermining economic recovery by holding back demand and harming productivity and supply potential.
So, as you just heard, income and economic inequality in the States is a very large issue, and so because of that and other aspects of the American economy, our economy has greatly impacted political polarization. Income inequality itself has greatly increased in the past 30, 40 years, especially since the Reagan administration. And because of that income inequality, because people vote from their pocketbooks, the division between parties has grown even stronger, and extremism even within the parties themselves has grown as well. Corruption within the federal government and state governments is also a very large issue, as it contributes to the development of economic policies in the government, which are generally pushed to right-wing extremes by corporations who essentially bribe the representatives or congressmen, etc., and form policies in order to benefit themselves. Economic growth also contributes to this. For economic growth and the bargaining power of corporations is directly linked. So as our economy goes up, so does corruption. And going off of that as well, capitalism is also a very significant aspect with regards to political polarization. For capitalism itself gives inordinate power to those at the top of the economic ladder. So because of this, the wealthy, the large corporations are able to essentially manipulate our politics, and the development of corporate media has also greatly impacted polarization, because since the Reagan administration and Reagan's veto of the Fairness Doctrine, as well as the Citizens United versus FEC case, which have allowed large corporations to use money as a form of free speech in order to fund large campaigns for president's bills and other such political things. They have greatly impacted the whole spectrum of voters across America and led them towards their ideals, which are generally quite extremist.
Okay, so going back to politics here, so pretty much since 1994, Pew Research has been studying this widening of a gap in political partisanship. As you can see in this lovely graph, in 1994, the median Democrat and the median Republican were all fairly close together in the middle ground when it came to being either consistently liberal or consistently conservative on their ideals. But over the years, from 1994 to 2014, the median Democrat and median Republican has dramatically split between Democrats moving left, Republicans moving right on their ideals. And they're looking very unfavorably upon each other. So in 1994, 17% of Republicans said that Democrats were going to ruin the country, and vice versa. And Democrats said that 16% of Democrats said that Republicans were going to ruin our country. But now in 2014, that number has jumped for 43% of Republicans say that Democrats are going to ruin the nation, and 38% of Democrats say that Republicans are going to ruin the nation. This is hugely increasing over twofold in some of the cases. But really what has caused this is that people aren't happy with the system as it is now. They want some kind of different system, and the two different ideals, the left-wing and the right-wing ideals, they're two different ways to solve the same problem, and they can't agree on which way they want to solve the problem in our nation. So for our solutions, we call for having more third parties in our nation. Like in Europe, third parties they don't have third parties. They have many parties in the European Union. They have all these different parties focusing on different issues, and no matter what your issue is, you can throw your vote towards one issue here, one issue there, because their parties are more issue-based instead of more general aspects. So if we have a multi-party system, we can just take the things that we want out of our government and just do away with what we don't want out of it, to have a more accurate representation of what America stands for. So, thank you very much.
Don't turn it off yet.
Brandon, in the future, what change would you make to your group norms, and how would you expect that to improve your team presentation?
So, to answer your question, be more prepared and practice more and just kind of stay more on task and cut time down. And could you restate the second part of the question again?
Just the change that you would make to your group norms, and the second part is how would you expect that to improve your team presentation?
We would be more prepared. We would know what we're going to say, and we would be more confident.
Sabriana, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
It was definitely more that I think as a group, we were able to bring a consensus more of what we were planning. And for myself, especially working in a group, I've improved on actually talking to my group and getting opinions on what I should be doing and what I could do to help them.
Thank you. Sky, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
Well, Emilio had a great, on her thesis on, or not thesis, it's more paper, but on the economic aspects was very fascinating about what she researched, not just containing to trickle-down economics and pretty much the failures of the Reagan administration, but also with the including the Trump phenomenon that's happening now, and just tying that into the aspects of how we look at the economic system and corruption in our modern day politics and why that is contributed to increasing polarization in our politics.
Emilio, having finished your project, what, if anything, do you consider to be a gap in your team's research that, if addressed, would make you feel more confident about your conclusion?
Well, ultimately, as we're putting the presentation together, it was kind of an issue to find solutions. Practically the only solution that we could really come up with was the third party one that Sky mentioned. So I think that if we had spent more time researching solutions and finding more possibilities that could solve political polarization, then the presentation would have a more rounded conclusion.
Thank you. And last question, Kenneth. Since Emilio was sort of spotlighted for having some pretty good research, can I give one specific way your thinking has changed as a result of learning about Emilio's findings? Give one specific way that your thinking has changed because of Emilio's research.
I don't know how to answer that question.